So let's talk about dealing with your aging narcissistic parent. Now, I often post on TikTok, Talk with Anna, and one of the videos that got the most views was one on dealing with your aging or older narcissistic parent. And in a way, it didn't surprise me because having older parents myself, I have seen what a challenge it is firsthand to have the existing set of issues that we had and now have the aging process. And I don't know about you, but I think I had this fantasy that when they got older, they'd soften and they'd appreciate me more. It would become easier to be together and to deal with. And I'm finding that it's really often quite the opposite. Oftentimes that the characteristics that they had before have become more pronounced. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't moments where maybe they do soften, but those moments where they do heighten and feel they are right or feel entitled and justified, those also get pretty heightened. So today we're just gonna talk about this, and I'll also talk about it more in depth on the podcast because I think there's a lot to say on this topic. And if you're dealing with an aging narcissistic or difficult parent, just know you are not alone. We're gonna navigate it here together. So like we mentioned, as narcissistic parents age, their behavior may become even more pronounced, and they may become more demanding, manipulative, or even more controlling. And it is so important to set boundaries then and to prioritize your own well-being. And that's why I'm so glad you're here, because we're starting to talk about coping skills. So far, you've seen videos on detachment. You've seen videos on the dialectical. You saw a whole separate video about not pleasing the unpleasable. So starting to understand and use these coping skills right now, especially if your parent isn't an older narcissistic parent, can be key to then handling this next phase to come. But if you're just jumping in now, it's also great because you can layer and practice these skills. It's almost like if you are new to a sport, you have to keep practicing. Sometimes like things work out exactly as planned with a coping skill, but the more that you know and test what works to get to your goal with them, the better. So as we mentioned, there really is no challenge harder than dealing with an aging parent, but an aging narcissistic parent. And I don't talk too much about my stepdad, but I want to bring him up as an example, who I also had a little bit of a strained relationship with, but in a different way than with my mother. He's a pretty high-functioning alcoholic, and now he's 83, and he historically has been very nice, but can often be withdrawn and really never showed me much affection, even though he's been in my life since I was 7. But I remember about 8 years ago now, he got really sick, and my mom and his family thought he might die. And I remember feeling an extreme feeling of sadness and depression, which really honestly surprised me a little bit because we didn't really have the closest relationship. So I was surprised by my own level of intensity of sadness. And what I started to understand was that even if I didn't have a strong relationship with someone, an emotional closeness, if you've had childhood trauma, just having someone being there defaults into a very meaningful place in your life. And he's living and he's alive right now. But that just really gave me a feeling that when he got better, maybe we'd be closer. Maybe he had more of a zest for life, but none of that happened. It all kind of just reset. And I just feel like I had to tell that example because it's something that I think a lot of people relate to, is this idea of maybe being able to have some type of closure when their parents age, to wrap up the disconnected moments with them. And we're really normalizing. If that happens for you, we are so happy, and you can never say never with a parent-child relationship. But what I do want to say is, if we think of a narcissistic or difficult parent with a shallow emotional well, and again, I don't think my stepdad's actually narcissistic. I don't just call everyone a narcissist, but I do think that he has a little bit of a shallow emotional well and difficulty with closeness in general, which is probably why he and my mother connected. So we're just noting that things don't always wrap up, and accepting that is really hard. Things don't always get resolved. I'm noticing that there's a lot of heaviness when we think about the idea that the relationship doesn't get better, easier, or like I mentioned in my personal example, that there's not the feeling that things will repair. And I think that we'll talk about this as a lead-in topic to grieving the type of relationship you wish you'd had with your parent. But I think that when you're dealing with older parents and older narcissistic parents and older narcissistic family dynamics, we sort of have to rewrite the rules, rewrite the expectations, and making sure that we're really spending a lot of time allowing ourselves to grieve, right? Because that's what it came up for me. That's what it brought up for me, was now I'm grieving the fact in that moment that I thought my stepdad might pass away and we never resolved things. But I'm also grieving, when he got better, the loss of the type of paternal father figure I wished I'd had. So you're kind of grieving two things at once. And that's what I see within myself and people I work with. And now you're kind of doing double duty with the complexity of the issue. And it's really extra important to have a lot of compassion and self-love, which we'll get to more in the podcast. So please like and subscribe, and we'll talk more about grief in future episodes. Have a wonderful day.